night, so I made a short presentation. I think that will make my job easy to
Fantastic.
explain it. So I'll just flash the presentation. I'll quickly go through the slides and then we can work on it.
Sure. Let me see if I can
Yes, you
accept
have to
to
enable
share
that.
the screen. Let me just see how I can do that. See, let me see if I can open that and spotlight video. Okay. All right. How do I share the screen? Start sharing screen. I'm just going to share simultaneously. That's the one. Okay. Have you got it?
Yes, got it now.
Fantastic. Do you want to?
Yeah. Is it visible now?
Absolutely.
Okay. So just briefly that in Pakistan, how the government and the healthcare authorities, they dealt with this pandemic. So there were two levels of intervention. One was strategic at the highest level. And in that, I would just like to share that in Pakistan, there is a lot of politics, you know it, and health is a provincial subject. So that makes things very difficult for the government to take decisions and then implement them because it's the provinces and the provincial chief ministers which have to implement that. So for that purpose, the government took a wise decision to establish NCOC, which is the National Command Operations Center. It holds regular meeting and sometimes the meetings are chaired by the Prime Minister himself. This NCOC constituted of Federal Health Authority, that is the Federal Ministry of Health, the National Disaster Management Authority, because of course COVID was certainly a huge disaster for not only for Pakistan but world over. It also has provincial representations according to the need, whether they are the education ministers, the health ministers, and then the armed forces. The role of NCOC was to interact with international agencies, making policies and SOPs, uh, going through financial decisions, what funding has to be allocated for different provinces or for interventions related to COVID, logistics, that is provision of all these things and equipment and everything, and then the opening or closure of the education institutions and other things. So this was the major role of NCOC. And then at the tactical level, that is the provincial health authorities were acting and the armed forces, there were public health interventions and that clinical care was the mainstay of this whole epidemic. Just a short mention about the armed forces of Pakistan. They are different because I have been to UK twice. I visited the office of Colonel. Uh, I visited a few facilities in Leeds and other places. And I was surprised that the UK Royal Defence Medical Services did not have their own hospital. They all depend on the National Health Services, their hospitals. And one of the main principal seat is probably the QE in Birmingham, where they have a defense medical department. So that is because of the reason that the NHS services are so comprehensive that the soldiers and their families, they are all dependent on them. And I was briefed there that all the war casualties and the war injuries, they were flown from overseas and directly brought to QE Birmingham, and they were treated and managed. Similarly, the families, they come to all the NHS hospitals and they are especially given a sort of a good treatment over there. In Pakistan, the public health facilities, they are not very strong. And so that is the reason that we want to take good care of the soldier and his family, and that keeps his morale high. And that is the reason that the soldiers, they are ready to lay their lives. So we have about 45 hospitals. They range from smaller to bigger hospitals. We about 10 of them are class D Delta hospitals, that is, which are about 50 bed. And then we have about more than 10 teaching hospital or tertiary care hospitals, which are more than 500 bed. And then we also have 35 field hospitals, which are deployed in like the tribal areas previous and now the Fata along the Afghanistan border and in the Azad Kashmir and in the Siachen area. In all these hospitals, the uniformed soldiers and their families, they are treated and they were admitted during the COVID. The supporting staff and the families were treated. We had established a centralized procurement system for PPEs, for medicine, for other things related to COVID. And then the data from all the hospitals was shared on daily basis. We had a strong referral system, like in any patient admitted in a smaller hospital, these facilities are not sufficient, then they were transferred to the bigger hospital. And then the civilian patients also kept on coming, sometimes by request from the government, some renowned politicians, scholars, and so on. And they were also treated in the military hospital. In the military hospital, what strategy they adopted that all the cold cases, they were discharged, like cold cases of psychiatry, tuberculosis, and other diseases. The cold surgeries were postponed, ENTI, dental department, they were closed. The OPDs were closed, outpatient departments. And the routine healthcare, whatever besides COVID, that was being dealt online. And the patients who had chronic diseases like hypertension, diabetes, or others, their medicine on a monthly basis, they were dispatched to their homes. The first wave was taken as a national emergency, so the reservists was called, and they were working in different hospitals. We had a good logistic system for PPEs and other material which was provided to each and every hospital, and there was no complaint that they don't have the N95 mask or the gowns and other things. Meanwhile, Pakistan itself started its indigenous production of PPEs, the textile factories in Faisalabad, and then the sports industry in Sialkot. They were, manufacturing top class N95 masks and PPEs and gowns and face shields and goggles and so on. So that was very handy in saving the exchequer instead of importing it from abroad. The protocols that were followed in the army were that everybody who was tested positive, their baseline lab test and radiology was done. The mild to moderate cases, which were not oxygen dependent soldiers, they were all admitted. The soldier testing positive and fever, you can't send him back to the unit barracks and lines because he can't be managed over there. Then we established some step down facilities for quarantine. During the COVID, the first wave, all the schools and colleges were closed. So some of the army public schools, they were converted to, some detention facilities as a quarantine for mild cases. The families was given treatment at home and they were regularly being followed up. The severe cases of COVID, they were all admitted in the military hospitals. And then we had three categories of ward, the general ward, which were not very serious, and high dependency unit. The main bigger hospital, tertiary hospital in Rawalpindi, is known as military hospital. And for the info of General, he must be knowing that the British military hospital, they had a chain all over the world. This military hospital in Rawalpindi is military hospital number 14. And just to share with all the audience that I happened to visit military hospital number 10, and that was in Accra, Ghana, when I was deployed in UN mission in Sierra Leone back in 2005. So this military hospital number 14, this had this high dependency unit, which consists of about 100 beds, and then intensive care centers also, where almost all the patients, they were on ventilators. The patients were managed by a multidisciplinary team, which included the infectious disease specialist, internal medicine, pulmonologist, critical care, and then endocrinologist, because those who are dealing with healthcare in NHS, they know that the Asians, they have a very high incidence of diabetes. So that is the reason that once you are giving steroid to the patients, it's difficult to manage their blood glucose level. So the endocrinologists were available there, and any other specialty which was ever required. The complication that we experienced was the COVID pneumonia, the cytokine storm, myocarditis, nephritis, and then we had superadded infections because of use of steroids or other things that are bacterial, fungal, and late onset tuberculosis. Many patients ended up in pulmonary fibrosis, and then late complications were the hemorrhages. Just to share with all of you that I also tested positive for COVID-19 on 1st of December. And I had initially fever and body aches. And then after about 7 days, I felt about some tightness in the chest. So I went again to the hospital. My CT chest was done, and they, diagnosed that I had mild pneumonia also. So my score was 10 by 40. And then I was hospitalized for about a week. I was given remdesivir and then steroids and other antibiotics. So I recovered after about a week. But exactly after 12 days of discharge from the hospital, I experienced pain lower abdomen and then frank blood in the urine. So I went again back to the hospital, and they thought that it is because of the aspirin that I was getting and the uh, low plat or the blood thinners. So they were stopped, and after about 2 days, I recovered and I'm back home. So thromboembolic phenomena, electrolyte imbalance, and post-viral asthenia, that is weakness, that continues even for 6 months. What is the status now that the second wave is receding? The military is strictly following the protocols I have seen all over the hospital and in the offices also. But we, the military people, we are part of the larger society. So we contract from other friends and family members, whosoever are in the civil side. There's still a denial, even at the national level, that there is no corona, there is no such disease, and people, still are
No,
not.
absolutely. I think this is the thing, General Asif. There is a lot of there is still a lot of denial, not just within Pakistan,
Yeah.
within other countries, amongst the masses. What I'm going to do is I'm just thinking, because the thing is, your experience with Corona uh, within within yourself, with your family as well. There's a lot of us who've kind of lost friends and relatives this past year, in 2020. I myself have lost seven people, from close family to friends, from Corona, and there's literally every single person that I've come across, they have lost someone, and still there's denial. What I'm going to do is, because this is a, the thing is, there's so much knowledge in yourself. I'm just thinking, I mean, let's bring General Paul Nansen in as well, so he can speak about some of the experiences here in the UK, especially on leadership as well. And what we will do is we will have we'll bring more of this into the question and answers at the end as well. What would you be able to do that as well?
Yeah, sure, sure.
Fantastic.
Just allow me, I
Yeah,
may finish this slide.
yeah. No,
Yeah,
absolutely. If you can do
this
that.
is this is what we experienced, that Pakistan had a comparatively less mortality and morbidity.
Yes.
What are some of the reasons that I identify are the social distancing, because 50% of the population is female, and here we don't have the custom of handshake or hug. Then the Islamic obligation of ablution that we all do 5 times during our prayers, washing hand, face, and other body parts, and then hand washing before and after the meals, hijab, worn by the ladies, acts as a mask itself. In 70% population is in the rural area where we don't have any ventilated, so it's open, and that's the reason there's hardly any COVID-19 in the rural areas. And then the masjid, the prayer areas, they observe very regularly the SOPs, distancing and standing at distance, and the government itself acknowledged that there was no outbreak because of the masjids. So this is all. I have a few other slides regarding the national data, which I'll project later if you desire. Thank you.
Fantastic. General Paul, let's go to General Paul Nansen, and let's see if we can unmute.
Can you hear me, Mohammed?
Absolutely, I can hear you. Yep.
Yeah, I've got no slides, so
No, it's fine. Don't worry. Don't worry.
well, listen. Firstly, two things. First, I'm not a medic, and there are people far better qualified than me to talk about the medical aspects of COVID. And I'm already out of date. As I said before, I left the army back in the summer, so I've got nothing but admiration for friends and colleagues in both the army and the military and the NHS who are continuing to fight this terrible enemy. What I thought I'd do is just share with you a few lessons, leadership lessons, that we learned in our fight against COVID, and hopefully, get the discussion going. Are you still there, Mohammed?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm listening.
Sorry, the screen's all gone.
Oh gosh, hold on. I do apologize. That should be better. Can you see that? Hello?
Hello, yeah.
Yeah. That's all right. I'm just trying to remove the screen share, and let me just do that. I think the screen share should have gone now.
No, it's still
there. It's still there. Yeah.
Okay, don't worry. You carry on, General Paul, and I'll try to get the.
sorry.
If you could do that, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, General Paul, carry on, please.
Yeah. Okay. So really, as I said, my background has been I've done quite a lot of time on operations. So of course, leading in crisis has been part of my life, and I've learned a great deal of lessons along the way, and seen a great number of very competent leaders who have thrived, have been resilient in the face of crisis. And I think if I was to summarize what stood them out from the rest, it would be that they set us up ultimately for success, and then they were able to adapt and change as the situation evolved on the ground, as it always does when you're in a crisis situation. I was faced with, back in March last year, I was faced with a crisis situation, COVID, like we all were, non-operational, this is peacetime. And the way that we dealt with it in my part of the army was by applying the principles that we had taken from operations into a peacetime crisis environment. And then we adapted and we learned the lessons as we went along. And those are the sort of lessons that I'm going to share with you today. The situation that I faced, or we faced back in March, was a situation where we had over 5,000 young trainees in our training establishments that we had to look after. We had to get them back home. We had to change the training environment and bring them back in to be able to counter the COVID threat. So it was pretty fast moving, fast paced, and obviously incredibly complicated. So what do? We applied the principle we learned on operations. And if I was to sum it up, it would be in two phrases. It would be command driven and battlefield led. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So in terms of command driven, the first thing that we realized we had to do was define the purpose in terms of what we had to achieve throughout the crisis. That purpose needed to be clearly articulated. It needed to be something that everybody could rally around, and it needed to be something that could unite people against the common enemy, which in our case was COVID. So define the purpose was the first thing that we had to do. And then once we'd done that, we had to develop a plan that we would tackle the threat. And that plan, one of the lessons we learned very early on, that in order to get the most out of the people, we had to have collaborative buy-in for the plan, bring as many people into it as we possibly could, not just from within our own organization, but from others who perhaps had better insight onto what the problem was. So collaborative planning, establishing buy-in. And then the other thing that we learned very early on, that in terms of a plan, when dealing with a crisis, that you have to stress the plan as you go. And by stressing the plan, I mean, you have to, we call it war game, or you might call it rehearse, whatever you want to call it, but you have to bring in contrarians, people who can challenge your thinking, to make you think about things that could possibly go wrong or things that could possibly go right, so that you could build flexibility into the plan, because a rigid plan does not work in a crisis situation such as COVID. So once we'd stressed the plan, we then communicated the plan. We then made sure that everybody understood the plan, and communication, keeping it simple, getting it out to the right people, getting it right to everybody was a key challenge and something that we learned on the way. And I'll come back to communication in a minute. So that was the command driven bit. This was setting the conditions for success. But of course, we have an adage in the British Army, and I'm sure it's the same in the Pakistan Army, that no plan ever survives contact with the enemy. As soon as you start to engage with a crisis situation, the thing changes, metamorphosizes, thinks of different ways, whether it's a disease or whether it's an enemy. And so, the plan can be the best plan in the world, but it will not survive contact with the crisis. And so you've got to be flexible and to be able to adapt your plan as the situation unfolds. And we got better at doing that as the crisis went on. And I think there were two things. Part of it was our ability to make decisions armed with enough information, not necessarily all the information, but enough information. And the second one was our ability to manage risk and to understand the cause and effects, balance the cause and what the necessary effects of every decision we took in terms of looking after our people. And I think the big lesson we learned in terms of battlefield led, of leadership, was about empowerment. And if I was to put one thing about how we managed to tackle COVID, it was about empowering junior leaders to use their initiative, to tackle the wicked problems they faced without having to look over their shoulder and ask for permission, because the thing was moving so quickly that there wasn't time for them to ask, to pause, to think almost. They just had to act. And so we had to create the conditions whereby they knew the intent, they knew the purpose, they knew what we had to achieve, and therefore they felt the freedoms to use disciplined initiative to get after the problem and solve some of these really knotty issues. And it was quite amazing at how young leaders stepped up and, you know, took the initiative and solved some pretty complex problems that I would never have been able to do. And so one of the ways we managed to do that was going back to the communication piece. The old hierarchical military structure of communications just didn't work. You just can't afford to have a slow, methodical passage of command. You've got to open up the entirety of the communication pipeline and have we call it an all-informed net, but just get everybody you possibly can listening to what's going on. And every morning we had what we call a stand-up, where we had 70, 80, 90 people on there every morning, just listening to what was going on, picking up the information, understanding what the changing situation was. So they felt able, empowered to be able to use that initiative that I was talking about. And then my final point, before I go back to Mohammed, my final point was, you know, leadership is leadership, whether it's on a battlefield or whether it's in a hospital ward or whether it's over a Zoom. And I think one of the things we learned was that people, when they were faced with having to communicate like we are doing now, forgot the basics of leadership. And those basics are that leaders have to have presence. They need to be able to inspire their people. They need to look after their people. And they need to have this, we call it serve to lead at the centers, this ability to be empathetic and, you know, have this servant leadership where you put other people before yourselves. And I think one of the things that some lost their way in this COVID environment, where we do find ourselves isolated, distanced, working over screens, is that leaders forgot the basics of being able to inspire their people to do things ultimately are dangerous and sometimes really unpleasant. So those are my points, Mohammed. Those are the lessons that we learnt. I hope that helps, and we can have a discussion about it. Back to you.
Absolutely. Thanks, General Paul Nansen, for your great words. One of the things, I mean, I was mentioning this to one of my colleagues from the NHS, that it's like mission command and other military principles can guide health service professionals and as well as business leaders thrust into this crisis in a good way. There's so much we can actually learn from yourself and General Asif on how to tackle this virus. The people at the front line, like our NHS friends, for example, Dr. Saima Latif, who I'm going to ask in a few seconds to speak, followed by Professor Zafar, they can also explain a bit more in detail on what COVID is potentially and what is happening and how we can potentially change in a way to tackle this disease should the disease change, which it's already changing actually. So Dr. Saima Latif, can I ask you to say a few words?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, General Sukera and General Nansen. I think that was really, really useful to set the context. I quite enjoyed the use of military terminology there. A lot of similarities, I guess, in how we have led from a public health point of view. I think basically in the UK, we've from a public health point of view, we've got a national, regional and local sort of footprint at which we work, within which we will have strategic and tactical and operational cells. As far back as early March, I think we all in Public Health England, we did go into business continuity, and some of the key lessons of how we have dealt with COVID and some key points around leadership. I'm assuming that's what you want me to talk about, Mohammed?
No, absolutely. Whatever is your expertise. I mean, we're here to learn from each other. Don't worry.
So basically, the first thing to state is, and using the military terminology, this was an unknown enemy. It was unknown to all of us, and we're still learning about it. And I think we've been preparing for a pandemic for years now. We've always been expecting the next flu pandemic, and I think swine flu was a bit of a dampener. It didn't really live up to what we thought the pandemic we were expecting would be. And no matter how much you rehearse or you think you're prepared, when the actual thing hits you, there's just so many variables that you're never prepared for. So I think the first leadership lesson that I can think of is change and adapting to change. There needs to be a willingness to change. And I think General Nansen made a point about this, about having the plans, but no plan survives. I wrote that down. No plan survives contact with the enemy, with the virus in this case, and spot on. Our plans very soon, I think we stuck to the core principles, but we had to adapt, we had to change, and we had to be ready to do that. And that change has persisted on an ongoing, almost daily basis. And it's dependent on the circumstances in which you're working and in which the virus is operating. So we've seen different things come to the fore in different waves of the pandemic. And currently, as you're aware, we're dealing with the variant, the virus that is mutated. Now, all viruses are known to mutate, so this was expected. But when it happens, you never really know what shape or form it's going to take. And we're still learning about this new variant. And we know that the Kent variant, the UK variant, for example, is in between 50% more transmissible. And so we've had to adapt according to that. And so that is that willingness to adapt your processes, how you're working, what the advice will be to the citizens and the community, and we're going to manage dealing with outbreaks, etc. So that was, I think, leadership lesson one, is the readiness to adapt, to change. And I only have two other lessons that I think stand out for myself. Communication. I cannot overstate the importance of good, clear, concise communication. And it sounds such a trivial thing to say, Mohammed, but honestly, when you see it happen all around you, a clear example that stands out for me is the Leicester lockdown. For those of you in the UK, once we came out of our national lockdown, Leicester was the first area to go into a sort of city and county lockdown. And we engaged with behavioral change scientists that came out, and one of the key things that we picked up, and I actually live in Leicester, so I could actually feed back to them directly from the ground, was that there was no culturally sensitive communication that had been given to the residents of Leicester. The Leicester lockdown happened straight after Ramadan, and I heard in very senior meetings people refer to, oh, this is the Ramadan effect. People were going to the mosque, therefore it has spread. I said, well, the mosque was shut. We were in a national lockdown. The reason it has spread is because there has been inadequate communication in languages that the community will understand. We've got a vibrantly ethnic community, diverse community in Leicester. And I think culture and faith overlaps, and the messages were not being given in different languages, which they did subsequently do. but it was a bit late. By that time, it had spread. So, you know, clear, concise communication in languages that people will understand, and the use of pictorial communication, pictures. We know a picture says more than 1,000 words, and that really is true. Little infographics that, you know, anyone can understand, and using the right channels to communicate. So your ethnic population in Leicester, for example, will not be listening to BBC News or Sky News. They'll be tuning into their home channels. So what communications are you using there? The use of WhatsApp groups, it's rife. It's been there for a while, but I think COVID has taken it to another level. How have we addressed communication across social media, and how have we made it culturally sensitive and tailored so that we're getting the message out? Because like a lot of people of dual heritage, I speak more than one language, and I did a few radio talks for the local community in Urdu. And one of the feedback I got back from a friend was, oh my God, my mother-in-law finally understood that COVID can be dangerous, and she decided not to go out and meet her friends because she heard your talk. That message just wasn't penetrating. So I think good, clear communication, whether it's at work, whether it's the communities you're working with, that's something that really, really stands out for me as a key lesson. And the last lesson in leadership, I think, Mohammed, would be collaborative working. And virtual working has allowed us in many ways to work more widely with a wider range of community partners. And the one thing COVID has taught us in our day-to-day work is in public health in the UK, we have always aimed to work collaboratively. I mean, we work well with our NHS partners, with primary care, secondary care. We've always worked well with local authorities, and I know Zafar will talk a bit about that, with our environmental health officers, our trading standards. But the way the partners have come together for COVID, and if you were to sit in one of our incident management team meetings, the wide variety of partners that you're going to see, right from Department of Health, right till member of the public. And I think the cross-fertilization of ideas and thoughts and suggestions made in those meetings, where you get to see all the different viewpoints, it's just been an example that I think will stay with us, and hopefully that will continue. So I'm just going to pause there, Mohammed.
No, thank you. You know what you said, the differences of kind of opinion and people around the table. I've been to meetings, for example, in the Ministry of Defense, and the variety of differences of opinion, etc., there is immense. People will be surprised how military, British military, or even the Pakistan military, how they kind of communicate and, you know, from so many different angles, and then focus on an objective and take it on there. There's so much we can learn. What I'm going to do, I'm going to ask Professor Zafar Iqbal, also known as Dr. Zafar Iqbal, to say a few words. Professor Zafar?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
I just to echo what our previous speakers have been saying, I think those are really valuable lessons in terms of leadership, and I think that can be applied in any aspects of life. And certainly, I mean, I'm going to be talking a little bit about what the impact of COVID has been on our local neighborhoods, our local communities. And again, I think some of those lessons are easily transferable to that kind of setting. You know, I mean, if I can just go through my notes a little bit. I mean, we're kind of aware of the impact COVID is on the health service, and the incredible sacrifices, personal sacrifices that people on the front line have made, and many have made the greatest sacrifice. And I think it's worth noting, and we mustn't forget that many of the high death rates were among the South Asian communities from Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. But also, you know, COVID has had a disproportionate impact on different groups. It hasn't been, the burden of impact hasn't been shared evenly. And certainly the poorer communities, the communities which are more deprived, have had much higher death rates. People with lower paid jobs have had a much higher death rates. So people like security guards, taxi drivers, chauffeurs, coach drivers, chefs, sales assistants, those kind of relatively low paid service type of posts, and they've seen much higher death rates as well. I mean, I work for a mental health trust. I work for the Midlands Partnership NHS Foundation Trust, which is one of the largest community trusts in the country. And there's been a massive impact on the mental health of the general population, as well as people with pre-existing serious illness. And we as a trust have seen a really big spike in new cases of psychosis, of people with existing psychoses that are having relapses. I know Dr. Gould's on the phone here and on the line, and he's a child psychiatrist, and he has seen a massive increase in workload in terms of families going into crisis and young people going into crisis. But that's people with kind of with serious illness. There's also been a really powerful impact on the general population, and the levels of anxiety and depression have increased remarkably. I think depression has possibly gone up, is possibly doubled, which is a really massive increase. So you can see the problems in the kind of wider and the wider kind of society, and this is partly due to networks being disrupted, some of the support organizations not being there, people not being able to access GPs, people not being access other general services which they had before. But also, the worries about finances, worries about employment. Employment is going to be a major issue in the future, and that's going to have a big impact on our social fabric. And especially among the poorest communities, there are some projections indicating that we may well see doubling of unemployment in the kind of poorest areas. And really, when you look at the jobs which are being lost, it is the low-paid jobs which are which are being lost, and it's causing a real financial hardship. There's all kinds of reports coming out that many families are really having difficulties in kind of paying their basic bills, food, subsistence, etc. And I can see, there are a lot of community leaders on the call here today, and I'm sure they will be able to link in with that. But on the positive side, on the leadership side of things, what's really interesting thing is that I don't know how to kind of put it in military terms, but really there's been a remarkable response from local communities. Neighbours are connecting, they're looking after each other. Informal groups have been popping up everywhere, thousands have been popping up. Many members, hundreds of thousands of people have stepped forward to volunteer for the NHS, to volunteer for local organisations. And this is translated into practical help for food banks, telephone befriending services, staffing helplines, all kinds of volunteering, which is really made a big deal. And we weren't really expecting that kind of level of support. So I think that's actually really positive. So I think for me, the really important leadership questions are, because COVID might well go away, but I think some of these longer term problems are going to stay with us. And I think the community resilience is going to be critical for this. So it's about leadership, really. So, how do we support and how do we invest in our local communities? How will our faith-based organizations rise to these future challenges? And how do we? I mean, what is the role of government in this? What's the role of local government in putting health and well-being at the center of what we do? It's interesting, in New Zealand, I've got a really interesting approach where they're actually making health and well-being as a central focus for a large part of their objectives. And my final kind of point is, I think it's really good to talk about leadership. It's really good to talk about sort of communication, etc. But also, I think it's really important that we look after our own health as well. And we've all got our own challenges. And there are 5 really good evidence-based ways to well-being, and those are around physical exercise. Those are around remaining linked in with people, remaining inquisitive, looking after our sort of education as well. And volunteering is certainly good for us, as well as it does good for other people. So there are all kinds of things that we can do to look after ourselves within this area. So I don't think I've got answers for you, Mohammed. I've got a series of questions there, but hopefully it'll lead on to an interesting debate.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Zafar Iqbal. I'm going to go to Reverend Rana, who's he's a reverend. He's been involved in the church for a while. He's from Pakistan. He's worked with the Archbishop of Canterbury. And Reverend Rana, are you there?
I am.
Fantastic. Would you mind saying a few words of your experience of what's been happening?
I have been enjoying the conversation by senior military men, doctors, and all these sort of people. I think that briefly I can share my own personal experiences and experience of the religious communities I share with around the country. It has been a difficult time for us all, but with the help of the people who have provided a lot of technical support, people at NHS in the UK and people in other health authorities around the world, that has helped significantly their communities. I think finally we have realized that faith has also played a significant role in keeping the spirit high, have helped people in difficult times. And on the other hand, there has been very difficult times too, in many ways, when faith is misused or misinterpreted, and not really theologians and scholars help people to go in line with what they need. But anyway, instead of talking too much, I will leave things with you. But in my Christmas and New Year message, what I quoted from the King's speech, which King George VI gave in 1939. He quoted Minnie Louise Haskins' famous poem, which was quite helpful for me to see how difficult times can be, and still we can hold on to our faith. It's just a couple of lines.
Reverend Rana, just to quickly interrupt you, we can't see you online.
Oh, you can't see me?
Nope.
Okay. I think that is something, a problem with.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. You're back. Don't worry. Carry on. Okay. Sorry.
So it's just a couple of lines. Minnie Louise Haskins' famous poem, which King George VI quoted in his King's speech in 1939. And I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, "Give me a light, and I may tread safely into the unknown." And he replied, "Go out in the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. That shall be better for you, and light and safer than a known way." I myself, not as a priest, but of course, I share experience with my imam brothers and people from other faith traditions, how helpful we have been to our faith communities, and faith communities can still enrich. But this is also responsibility of theologians, scholars, bishops, and all those people whom God has given authority in this world to act wisely and to advise in the light of our traditions, which of course can bring a lot of love and peace. And thank you very much, Mr. Abbasi and all other friends, for arranging this and bringing us together from different spectrum of life and using that technology wisely and rightly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Reverend Rana. It's always good to have people from the different faith communities give their viewpoints. Thank you. I'm going to go to Mr. Faisal Kundi from Pakistan, who's, I don't know if he's available. Faisal, are you there? Okay, if Faisal's not available for the time being, hold on. Zach Khan, do you want to come on? Do you want to say a few words for your experience as Association British Muslims in Manchester and what you've been doing and some of your experiences?
Yes, of course. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. General Sukera, General Nansen, Professor Zafar, Dr. Latif, Reverend Rana. and unfortunately we weren't able to hear from Faisal Kundi, but I'm sure we will in the near future. Colleagues and friends, I start by congratulating you all for all of the work which you've done. I would also like to, in particular, thank Mohammed Abbasi, who's arranged the Zoom meeting, and I think it's an incredible work which he's done, and I'm entirely grateful for all of his help which he's given to AOBM during this national crisis. Her Majesty's Armed Forces, the National Health Service, and communities across the UK have come together. And I think COVID-19 has actually united us. At a time of national crisis, I wanted to show our support for the public services, for the NHS and the military. My sister is a doctor, and I understood the pressures of which they undergo. They risk their own lives by going above and beyond to save others. And it was during this time that it became extremely difficult for me to interact with others. And given it was a pandemic, we weren't able to actually go about our normal lives. So on the weekends where we mentor young kids by simply playing football and understanding their needs and their requirements and giving them some sort of guidance, we weren't able to do this. And so some friends of mine came together throughout the Northwest and England, and we realized very quickly that we needed to actually form a volunteering group and a network of volunteers. So we utilized, as Professor Nansen has said, communication, and we utilized WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, all of the social media outlets which were available to us to recruit volunteers. And within the first 10 days, we were able to achieve over 50 volunteers. These 50 volunteers were throughout the Northwest and throughout the UK. Moving forward, there was difficulty with the NHS PPE, food parcels, and so we realized that we needed to come together with local businesses in order to provide hot meals to the NHS. And we were very, very grateful for all of the businesses who donated their time, money, and efforts. We provided over 30,000 hot meals to the NHS, the homeless, the vulnerable, and individuals who were in dire need. And it was during this time that the civic duty came to mind. And these are core practices of Islam, which have been embedded within our history. And as my Ustad and the Oracle, Mohammed Abbasi, has always taught us, COVID-19 gave rise to many leaders. And as I've written down in my notes, and I've also read General Nansen's book on standing straight, and I say that whilst standing up, it was particularly useful for us because we were able to use those principles by spreading the idea of leadership to communities, to volunteers who were then able to go out and work within their communities. It came to light that it was important for a phone bank service to be provided, and the phone bank was there to understand people's needs, requirements, difficulties of which they were undergoing. And I was very fortunate in having contact with Mohammed Abbasi, who was able during such a difficult time to give us many hours to go through mindfulness and meditation. And I personally, for one, I'm entirely grateful for that effort and that push, as I'm sure a lot of my volunteers were as well. And I think a lot of people didn't focus on mental health at that given time. And it really came into light that this was the time where people were going through financial difficulties, mental health issues, medical problems. And it was then when we were actually able to unite against us. I think coming to an end, I would say that COVID-19 has stood out and has enabled us to take care of one another and has enabled us to reach out to our neighbours and those in need. I would say that if there is anyone who is in need, given the fact that we've gone into lockdown 2021, to call out, you are more than welcome to contact Mohammed Abasi, Rubab Mehdi, or myself, Zach. We're here not to lead, but to help lead. And I think this is crucial.
Thank you, Zach. Thanks for telling people to get in touch with me. I was supposed to have delegated the responsibility to yourself and Rubab, but fine. Thanks, Zach. What I'm going to do, I'm going to ask Imam Asim Hafiz from Her Majesty's Armed Forces to see if he's available to say a few words after Zach. If not, Imam Asim, we'll go for Lieutenant Colonel Harriet from Her Majesty's Armed Forces. Harriet Kearns, can you hear me? Okay, if not, let's see.
He must have gone away from the computer, Mohammed, because he's in the participant, so he's
okay.
logged in.
Major David, can you say a few words? You're on the spot. You're on the spot, Major David. Go for it.
You certainly have put me in the spot because I wasn't expecting to speak. But anyway, here I am.
Sure.
Generals, sirs, ma'ams, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, very good afternoon to you. And thank you for the opportunity to listen to some very interesting reflections based on the current situation that we all exist in, I guess, which over the last sort of 12, 16 hours has, instead of becoming better, has become worse. But in the words of many commentators, perhaps the worst is yet to come before the good comes in the future. I'm no expert in this field. I'm somebody who's serving in the armed forces who has been affected by the COVID restrictions in terms of my day-to-day work. And if I can focus on that in terms of what I do, you know, technology has taken hold of us rather than us taking hold of technology. I would argue technology has taken a hold of us, and we have, if not all of us, most of us have spent hours and hours and hours in front of a screen on video calls, whether it be socially, whether it be in relation to work, and I so went out of my way to set up a face-to-face meeting just before Christmas, and this was following a series of telephone and video conferences regarding planning a future activity up in the north. But it got to the stage where there wasn't enough of a human-to-human contact to really understand what the objective of the meeting will be, how it will be how it will be deployed on the ground, as it were. And therefore, in a very COVID secure way, I went up there, met the individual, and he gave a totally different perspective to the conversation. Although we'd been speaking a number of times electronically, been there, not been able to shake hands, albeit, you know, and wearing masks and all the rest of it, we were still able to get a much more productive conversation. So I think what this, apart from the sort of disruption to life, to work, to family, to education, to the massive cost it's had to the economy, for me, what this crisis, which has been going on for, well, it started round about this, you know, just around about December 19. What it has done is really disrupted that human-to-human contact, which all of us as a society, whether we're in the Far East, in the Middle East, in Europe, in the US, wherever the case might be, where we that contact that we depend on a day-to-day basis. On the other side, I've also seen the real, and this has been reflected on a number of times, the real joined up partnerships that have been created out of all of this. whether it be those established relationships, for example, between the armed forces and civil authorities, which have existed before now, because we, as a member of the as the armed forces, we get called upon by civil authorities, whether it be flood relief, whether it be providing personnel to help out with the Olympics, any range of things. We already had those processes sort of set up, if you were, and what the additional bit we were able to do, reflecting on General Paul Nanson's thoughts, was that our experiences on operations were easily transferable to come back here to the UK to fight an enemy effectively. But again, what that has shown is how that human-to-human contact, that sort of collaboration, and that's a word that we've heard repeatedly this afternoon, is something that's really key and something that's going to take us forward to normality, if we can remember what normality might be. And I'll leave it there, Mohammed. Thank you for that.
No, thank you. Major Naveed, as we've kind of learned from some of our military friends, there's no such thing as normality in anything. Yeah, you try your best to be normal, but given the circumstances, the best way to work is to go with the flow. Let's see what happens. I'm just going to see if Imam Asim from Her Majesty's Armed Forces is here, or Lieutenant Colonel Harriet Kearns from the Army Engagement Team. If you can speak, let's see. I think they are trying to get in. I think someone's trying to get in. Let me just accept.
I saw Imam Asim sign in, so.
No, he's probably on his mobile. He's usually so so busy with everything. So he's probably, if not, what we've let me just see.
He's definitely in the participants.
That's okay.
Hello, this is Asim.
Oh, Assalamu alaikum. How are you?
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you, Muhammad?
Thank you. I'm well. Can you say a few words on how the not just the British Muslim community, but how the armed forces have been kind of engaging with some of the locals in Leicester or in different parts of the country, and what kind of reception they've been receiving?
Yeah, I'm always very keen on championing the values and standards of the British Armed Forces, which many people on this have heard me say many times, which is courage, discipline, respect, integrity, and selfless commitment. And I think the fact that these values are embedded within the armed forces right from the beginning, as soon as any member of the public wants to join the armed forces, these are values that they need to sign up to. So when crisis strikes, the armed forces, very quickly just fall back on those values without batting an eyelid. And so when they saw the country in crisis and when the country needed them, they were very quickly able to come to the front line to support our nation, not just as people perceive overseas, but also at home. And I think that's a lesson that we as the community can also take from our armed forces, that when it comes to dealing with difficulty and challenges, these are values that they share in common with people of the faith community. And in a sense, it's these values that should bring the armed forces and our communities together. And I think this crisis has shown our community that these values are something that we shouldn't take for granted, because just as this crisis has brought the good out in many people, it has also brought out the bad in many people, sadly. And we need to ensure that these values that we are rediscovering during this crisis, these values that we are, for some, maybe even for the first time, bringing into play into their lives, that they are totally embedded in us. Because for me, this crisis is not about where we are at the moment or where we've come from. This crisis is about where we will be once we're on the other side of the tunnel. Because we will get through this. We will get to the other side, but it's important that we learn the lessons of this difficult that we're facing as a community, and that we remember it going beyond the crisis. And so, going back to the armed forces, we embed these values in our armed forces way before they get to the front line. So when they get to the front line, they're not having to think about them. And it's the same with faith communities. We embed these values in our faith communities. So when crisis strikes and crisis hits, we're not having to learn these values. We already know these values. And so all these things that we've heard over this session about how people have come to the aid of vulnerable people and communities and key workers has come from the spirit of those values. And so I think it's key that we think about where we are in the crisis, how we've dealt with the crisis, where we've come from in this journey in the crisis, but also we now begin to create a society and a community and relationships and networks that endure beyond this crisis. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Imam Asim. Thanks for your words. I'm just going to see if Warrant Officer Chauhan is here and he can say a few words before we go on to the questions and answers.
Assalamu alaikum to everybody. Thank you very much, Mohammed Bhai.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
I'm really, it's a fantastic meeting, Zoom meeting, but all I will say to is Major Mohammed and Asim Bhai have actually mentioned everything. But to me, we go by our core values, and when wherever the armed forces are needed, in our case, the army, we're there to help. It's your army, and we're here to serve you. And that is the way I see it. I'm really honored and privileged to be serving in the Pakistani Army, even though we have got members from the Pakistani Army. But I just want to say that wherever we can, we will help anybody.
Fantastic. Thank you, Warrant Officer Chauhan, for those words. I have to ask someone from the Pakistan Army to end this, so we can go into the question and answers. Brigadier Fiaz, are you there? Can you say a few words?
Yes, thank you very much, Mohammed, for organizing this platform. And I'm so pleased to interact with so many bright minds and those people who have had experience of this very pandemic, and they express their views. I'm thankful to Lieutenant General Asif Mumtaz Sukhera also for giving a very deep insight about military's role in fighting this pandemic in Pakistan. And I'm thankful to General Paul also for giving an insight from UK side. I would like to introduce myself and my organization, and I would also reflect upon a few points which I have with me for this very forum. I have a qualification, academic qualification related to disaster management. I have my master's in disaster management, and my doctorate also relates to peace and conflict studies. In both the cases, I worked on climate change. And in Pakistan and across the globe as well, a lot of disasters are taking place due to climate change. So we had been managing disasters in Pakistan since 2005, when we were hit with a massive earthquake, and then in successive years from 2010 onwards, we were suffering floods like situation every year, every alternate year. We were going through this very challenging environment. And in 2018, we were suffering drought, again, a very challenging environment. So in last decade or so, Pakistan was in a very, very challenging environment, dealing with disasters. Then suddenly came up in February, March 2020, this pandemic, COVID-19. We, although were to great extent disaster resilient, but our resilience succumbed to the pressure which was posed by COVID-19. I mean, it was such a surmounting pressure that we had thought that in last 10 to 15 years, we had been confronting challenging disasters and our resilience level had come up. But this COVID made us down to our knees again. Then I would here highlight the resolve of my nation, the resolve of Pakistanis, that we again stood like a rock against this very COVID, in political will which was manifested at state level, mobilized masses to abide by the rules given to fight against COVID-19. And I say with a lot of pride and confidence that our nation stood up and they followed those rules so earnestly that today, God be praised, we suffered relatively much lesser casualties. So that is the level which I would like to share, and my feelings are that we got more resilient while confronting COVID-19 in the process. I have an organization named Integrated Resilience Network. So basically, I am at national level trying to integrate all those resilient corners which I find across the country and network them to a platform of IRN and raise the voice at an intellectual level which can be useful for the government to formulate a policy in fighting any disaster for that matter, and in particular the pandemic, COVID-19.
Fantastic.
In this very organization, General Sukhera is also part of that very organization. Muhammad is also part of that very organization. And I have got all like-minded professionals together who reflect upon the issues, and they give their very, very valuable comments and valuable input, which in one form or the other shared are communicated with the policymakers. Few more things which I would like to share as far as COVID-19 is concerned. Beside my organization, I find in my country that new normals have set in. We are in a new world. The old world which we used to see in 2019 and before February 2020 is no more there. Our people learned the business continuity concept under pandemic environments. Now, the concept of online communication, the concept of office management through online responses has become very common. Our schools are being managed through online education. And the concept which at national level we exercised was centralized control and decentralized execution. That's a very attractive principle, military principle, and we applied it here for the management of COVID-19 as well. And since in our country, National Disaster Management Authority is managed by a military man, normally a major general or a lieutenant general. He heads that very organization. And my college, where I had been commandant of Military College of Engineering, that is the center of excellence for disaster management. So we have a very intimate relationship with disaster management, and pandemic COVID-19 was a huge disaster. So in a way, military came up, and as Lieutenant General Asif Mumtaz Sukhera expressed, there was a very deliberate, comprehensive, elaborate planning done to utilize military's platforms for combating COVID-19. And our principle of centralized, controlled, and decentralized execution was applied in procurement of equipment, in distribution of equipment, in distribution of the hospitals, in distribution of beds even. That was very handy principle which we applied and we succeeded. Another aspect I would like to highlight that in my country, our scientists and our engineers, as our doctors were given a lead role of managing the patients, then a backup support by the call of our Prime Minister was created for our scientists and engineers. And I am very proud to say that we, in the process in this 1 year, produced state-of-the-art ventilator in Pakistan. The export level ventilator, there was a time in the beginning in March, April, May, we didn't have ventilators, and ventilator costs had gone so high that a lot of money was to be spent to get the ventilator. So our scientists, and particularly our military scientists, our military engineers, got down to production and manufacturing of ventilators. And Alhamdulillah, God be praised, we are proudly, we acclaim that within this time, we manufactured state-of-the-art ventilators, and now we are in a position to export those ventilators. This is also a takeaway of this very COVID, and this is something which we capitalized. And instead of succumbing to the pressure, we rather stood up as a resilient nation to not only cope up, but even to excel in this very environment. Last point which I would like to share is that if we want to really prepare ourselves for any challenge in future, we would have to follow the path and the trajectory of capacity building through a resilient environment. Without developing that capacity, we would not be able to reach that resilient level, which is very important for facing tomorrow's challenge. We would have to prepare ourselves today. And this is the takeaway from my side, that the preventive, mitigation, and preparedness strategies enable a nation to become resilient in future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brigadier Fiaz. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go on to the questions and answers. First of all, I would like to ask if anyone has any questions for Lieutenant General Sukhera or Major General Nansen, or for Dr. Saima or Professor Zafar. If there's any questions. There have been people commenting within the comment box. For example, I'll just if no one's going to ask a question, I'll kind of find a question.
Hello. Can I ask?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Carry on, Zach.
My question is to General Nansen. Having read your book, Stand Up Straight, I found it a book to be focused on skills and the foundations which were set for individuals and leadership skills. It was not only a book which is focused on CEOs to learn from, but also for the youth of today. So my question to you is, what would your advice be for the youth of today?
Great question, Zach. I think what we tried to say in the book was that it goes to what a lot of the of my colleagues in the forces have been saying, and Asif was saying about, you know, values-based, about learning, about courage, about selfless commitment, about serve to lead, about principles, about life skills, I think is the best way that I would talk about it. And one of the things that we emphasize in the book is that development of character. And, you know, leadership is all about character, I believe, not all about character, but largely about character. You know, people will follow you, particularly in a crisis situation, if they believe in you as a person. And that's about being an example. That's about living the values. That's about doing the right thing. That's about looking after yourself. And people have been talking about, you know, personal resilience, all of those things. So I think, you know, there's lots of good lessons that come from any organization, not just the military. The NHS is another great example of where people learn to be better people. And I think, you know, personal view, and please don't shout at me, I don't think our schools do enough at a young age to impart those life skills. And I think there's more to be done at a younger age to impart those values, those standards, to make people better people.
Fantastic. Is that okay, Zach?
Superb. I'm a governor at a school in Greater Manchester in Cheshire, and I'm actually a strong believer that we need to actually start instilling these senses of leadership from a young age, and it will help them develop as individuals. So here's to that.
I agree with you, Zach.
Thank you. Absolutely. And you know, there was a not a complaint. It wasn't. It was more like a comment, and the comment is basically there's a lot of retired or retiring senior officers in Her Majesty's Armed Forces, and once they retire, they go kind of their own way. You know, expertise is kind of very much kind of valued around the world. And I think what we need to do is we need to kind of utilize them back here at home. And there's a lot of quality, a lot of expertise there. I'll probably embarrass General Paul slightly, but we need you here in the UK doing more work, General, like the Pakistanis are doing in Pakistan.
Yeah, good point. We talked on the phone the other day. You're absolutely right. There's not that cabal of senior officers as there obviously is in Pakistan to do that. Yeah, good point.
No, absolutely. I'll be happy to put you in touch with a couple of UK senior officers who feel the same way as us. So I'm happy to do that. Anyone else for any questions? Sister Rubab Mehdi.
I think Mohammed Gul has a question.
Mohammed Gul?
Yeah, thanks very much, Mohammed. I think my question, I'm a child psychiatrist by professional background. And as Zafar rightly mentioned, I think we've seen a surge in the number of young people coming into contact with us in crisis, those with existing mental health condition, and those who would be presenting to us for the very first time. It's the question for General Sukera about, has there been any conversation within the country about the emotional impact of this trauma, especially with the school closed in most part of the world, including Pakistan and here in Britain? Because, we managed to keep the school open during World War I, during the World War II. I think this is the only time in the history, in the last 100 years, that the kids have not been going to the school. And again, for the kids to understand the impact of this pandemic, I think probably there is an element of anxiety among the parents about, how this virus or pandemic would affect them, not only physically in terms of clinically, but financially as well. So perhaps, the question for General Sukher about, what are the contingency plans in the short term as well as in the long term for the youth in Pakistan, how to manage this or the impact of this pandemic?
Well, I would say that the impact on education has been there and it is serious, and especially in the kids in junior classes, because whatever you say, this is probably the first time in Pakistan that the students have experienced online education where the systems were not that strongly developed. And I'm also a member of the Higher Education Commission. So I know that Higher Education Commission has invested a lot on building the connectivity platforms in the universities and in education institutions. They have provided a lot of funding for that. But for the junior classes and others, it is a problem. I'm facing myself. I mean, my two granddaughters, they are at home. My daughter, she is a doctor and she's finally a trainee in pulmonology, and she has been dealing with COVID-19 cases for the last 9 months. And luckily, she is the only member of our family who has not tested positive so far. So once she's away, my wife or myself, we connect the children, the granddaughters, to the school. And what I feel there that the school environment is certainly different, where the children, they interact with each other, with the teachers. There is a learning environment, and that really substantiates the learning process. So online learning is certainly difficult because it's difficult for the teachers also, I have seen, to keep the students involved and engaged, not get distracted from what is happening inside the homes or what is being served to them by their parents. So these are issues which are there, but the government is already working on that, how to improve this, how to improve the level of education and learning, and it doesn't get deteriorated with the passage of time. And as I mentioned in my presentation, I'm sorry that my presentation went a bit longer than what I have thought, and it was more of technical and from healthcare point of view. But the pandemic is suddenly receding in Pakistan, the second wave, and the daily death and the daily fresh positive cases is suddenly lowering down, and that's the reason that the government is planning to start the education, open the education institutions by 24th of this month. So let's hope for the best. And as Brigadier Fiaz also commented, that probably we are lucky in that aspect that the economy is running, the markets are running, the business is going well. Rather, it is more blooming as compared to other countries. I hope I answered Dr. Gul's question.
No, absolutely.
Do you allow the Sheikh say some one or two words, Sheikh Ramzi?
Can I ask a question? Can I ask a question before?
Yes, of course, Yasmin. And then we'll go for Sheikh Ramzi.
Thank you. My question is for General Nansen. Just wanted to ask him. I know he's spoken about it in detail, but I came in late. It's just that, just some bullet points on how he empowered, or how did the military empower the junior leadership. He spoke about communications and how it was done. If you could just repeat that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, Yasmin, we have a philosophy in the military, and particularly in the army, which we call mission command, which is about commanders understanding how to create the right culture in their organizations to allow what we call disciplined initiative. And that is set by, firstly, articulating commander's intent. So what it is you need to happen in the operation or whatever's going on. And then providing direction that tells people what they need to do, not how they need to do it. So you allow them the right resources and give them the freedoms to act with initiative. And it creates a culture whereby commanders will accept mistakes, because people will make mistakes, but they always retain responsibility and accountability for their people's actions. And it's all about generating those bonds of trust between the leader and the led to allow people to understand the boundaries within which they can operate with freedom. And it's the only way, if you get it right, it's the only way that you can possibly deal with the wicked situations, the wicked problems that we find ourselves facing today, because things change so quickly that young leaders, junior leaders haven't got time to ask for guidance or ask for advice. If they do, they miss the opportunity. Does that explain it, Yasmin?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Yasmin, and thanks for that, General Paul. I think it was the end of the 19th century that the Prussian general staff developed the concept of mission command. And basically, Yasmin, what it is, it's at its core, as General Nansen said, the mission command is about empowering officers or junior leaders to seek action in line with the intention behind that order, and not the order itself when it cannot be executed. So basically that requires flexible structures, a well-defined intent and trust. So for example, we have that trust, we have that kind of well-defined intent in our armed forces, in our health services, and also now in each other, because there's so many communities, as Zach explained what he did in Manchester. I didn't tell him to do what he did. He did that through his own contacts in own ways, and there's also the colleagues that Zach has empowered to do that. So Sheikh Ramsey, do you have any questions?
Well, I was just going to, I sent my question, but I was going to do one or two comments. Let me just say, Assalamu alaikum, God bless you all. Doesn't take long, Brother Abbasi. What is important is of course, we talk about education, we talk about the armed force, we talk about everything, but it's very important, we support the government. Government doing an excellent job at the moment. And especially, of course, people are worried about the education. As a former head of education for a Muslim Council of Britain for a number of years, I know what is happening. It is the first important, the unity and the saving lives. Is very, very important, saving lives. The education comes second. We are not going to be suddenly just go. We are still leading the world. But therefore, if we stay patient, we shall have, and I'm sure the education goes forward and be leading world. Thanks to Oxford University, which I'm part of it, AstraZeneca, which we done, all has to say, of course, Imam of the Oxford University, and therefore, what we need to do, we need to get together. We kept the Oxford from the Oxford. If I say we kept the Oxford very, very, very low after what's this called, after COVID, and everybody is working together. All the leaders are together, city council, county council, myself, and everybody is leading together to see how we can bring down the matter of the COVID, and how we can unite together, especially for the homeless. We have a very, very, lots of homeless here. We have lots of seniors which they are very worried, and as a chaplain for the mental hospital, I can see several brothers and sisters are there. I shouldn't say, but we have to help on that one. We have to think about them, not ourselves, and by the grace of God. And again, what I was going to say, unity is very important. Unity behind the government, doesn't matter right or wrong. Let's be united together, and God bless you all. You is in an excellent job. Lovely people. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Mr. Abbasi, it's Sagira Sharif from Lead. Can I speak?
You can, of course you can. We were waiting for you, Sagira. Carry on.
Yeah, so thank you very much, first of all, to all the speaker, and particularly General Shukera. I'm one of his students, so you can see I'm ex-Pakistan Army officer. I'm working in clinical genetics in Leeds, so I'm a prenatal lead for the service for Yorkshire Regional Genetics Service. So clinical genetics is not directly involved with managing COVID-19 patients. However, I just want to update the group that maybe I don't get this opportunity again, because there isn't anyone from genetics here in the meeting. Jen Sukhera and myself, we've been trying hard to establish clinical genetics in Pakistan and genomic education programs. So I've been involved with 3 leading universities in Pakistan so that we can set up this. So pre-COVID, enhancing the genomic, enhancing the inclusion of diverse population in genomic is very close to my heart, because I believe that our communities are not very well represented in genomic data sets, and that's why we don't know why certain therapeutic intervention work for some community and not for other. Because if you look at that, 80% genomic data sets are are white Caucasian population, and we don't have any ethnic minority data set. With COVID, I'm working very closely with Genomic England, and I don't know if you are aware of that, that we have launched a genomic studies, which was, and we were recruiting patients directly from intensive care, and we have recently, we have identified 5 genes, and there are 5 different genes found in different communities. And so it's important to just for our community to understand that it is very important to get involved in these studies, because these studies empower us to understand that why therapeutic interventions or why certain vaccine will work for certain population or will work more effectively for certain population. We sometimes struggle with these involving people or engaging people. And with Genomic England, I'm on their advisory group to facilitating that study. So in whatever capacity you are, wherever you are, please promote this, that people do get involved with this. I will share that the finding our initial studies as well, which will empower all the clinician and the scientific trial that what is best and what will work better for our community, particularly which certain drug will help our community to fight back COVID-19. The way somebody was mentioning that there are not many deaths in Pakistan, maybe our genetic factor are playing a very crucial role in preventing that. So it's very important to look at the different kind of aspect of this kind of a natural disaster what we faced.
National Disaster Management Authority, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is but this is, it's important for all the leader to understand, all the clinician to understand, healthcare professional in Pakistan, around the world as well, that when they speak with the patient, just encourage them to get involved with these kind of studies as well, which will empower, because our gene, I can't see any other reason. The 5 genes have empowered them, that there are differences. These are that why COVID is affecting people disproportionately. So it's important for any therapeutic intervention, for any pharmacogenomic advances, that this understanding is there for leader, for all healthcare system. Thank you very much. Thank you. Brilliant work for all the speakers, and thank you very much, everyone, and particularly Jen Sakhera.
Thank you, Dr. Sierra. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go to, I've got a couple more questions. It was supposed to be officially ending at 4:30, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to let this run till probably about 4:45, 4:48. And then what we'll do is we'll just keep the Zoom on, so you can connect with each other, meet with each other. I'm going to go to Mohammed Gul. He's got a question for General Nansen. And I'm just seeing if Gugan Gumilar, who's in Indonesia, and they're streaming into Indonesia this conference. So we can speak with Gugan after Mohammed Gul. Mohammed Gul.
Thanks very much, Abasi. General Nansen, I think you mentioned about good communication, which will be a success for any good leadership. As a soldier, you must have fought the battle with the unknown enemy in the unknown territory. I think same is the case with the COVID-19, that we have to change our tactic or strategies and our direction, and this has had happened in the last couple of months. What will be your message to leaders within NHS or leaders at local level? Because when the strategy change and when you're fighting with the unknown enemy, there is an element of distrust between you and your workforce. So how you can keep that momentum and the morale stay high, and there is no element of distrust?
Thank you, Mohammed. I think I absolutely agree with Saima in terms of communication, and you've got to over communicate in a crisis. I don't think you can over communicate. You've got to have little and often. And as I mentioned in my talk, we have a very hierarchical structure in the military, which is entirely right and proper, and it works very well, particularly when you're talking about disseminating orders. There has to be a formal process for giving out orders, because you've got to retain accountability. However, in a crisis situation, I think you've got to break down those barriers, and I think you've got to be found even on operations that you've got to create. We call it an all-informed net. As many people as possible listen to what's going on, get situational awareness, contextual understanding of what's going on, because that allows and generates this understanding of intent, and therefore people can operate. But going to your point on trust, and it's all about trust, because if you're going to take initiative, then you've got to trust your superiors to back you, even if you get it wrong. And so trust is really important. And I think as we communicate in crisis, the best thing we can do is be absolutely honest, truthful, and upfront with our people. Tell it how it is. The bad news, the good news, whatever it may be. Don't try and wrap it up in tissue paper. Just get it out there, and they will appreciate it. They will respond to it, and they will react accordingly. So long-winded answer, but I think communicate, and be honest and straight with your people.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Gugan, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Brother Basi, for this initiative, Brother Paul in the UK. Hello, everyone. My name is Gugun Gumilar. I am a PhD student in Dublin City University in Ireland here. It's close to your place, maybe. You are in London, I'm in Dublin. Yeah, first of all, thank you for this remarkable program. So I really appreciate this initiative from Brother Abasi and Brother Paul. So a few things that I want to remind us all together. Now the situation in Ireland is getting worse. Almost 5,000 to 7,000 people get positive corona every day. So almost 10 people die every day here in Ireland. So Ireland is a very small country, but the fatality rate is getting worse here in Ireland. Back to Indonesia. Today Indonesia is also getting worse. So the fatality rate is more than 20%. So if you check the Google data in your computer, is the same as like in the UK. So I know the world is shifting. The world is getting worse right now, even though the vaccine is coming to Ireland and Indonesia. But I don't think that the vaccine is is really effective. But I hope so. The vaccine is effective. In regards to Indonesia, Indonesia has 270 million people. Doing vaccination is not easy. Indonesia has 17,000 islands. So the minister say that it could be for the vaccination, it could take around 15 months, but I don't think so. So right now, the number of positive corona in Indonesia is almost 10,000 people per day. So it's the number is getting worse. So I'm worried about my situation here in Ireland, Indonesia. But I hope the day is getting better. The day after day. But I think we need to make this platform. It's very important. Encouraging people in Indonesia, in Ireland, in the UK, bring the Global Peace Initiative is really important for us. So we couldn't do that, So yeah, we should stay unity, and we should push our stronger relationship between humanity here in Ireland, in UK, in Indonesia, and in anywhere, So I think we need to push our humanity. We need to push our relationship, our brotherhood, wherever our religions, wherever our race and nations, we need to keep our humanity, we need to keep our brotherhood, This is very important for us.
Thank you for
thank you, Brother Basi.
No, thank you. And you know, it's something else. I mean, I visited Indonesia now, I think for about 6 times, and the humanitarian aspect of Indonesians is absolutely great. But like the British and the Pakistani generals, Indonesians also don't kind of communicate their best, you know, who they are outside the country. And what I was actually thinking is something like this. I think if you can speak to the president's advisor, we can maybe do something similar for Indonesia. Do you have a question for General Nansen or Paul Saladin Armstrong? Do you want to say a few words before we finish?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to all speakers. So I think this is not the last, I think. So we can do initiative for more, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's discuss that, Gugan, and then we'll do another one. Paul Armstrong, who's the head of the Association of British Muslims. So he's been sitting there, and I'm sure you've got a few questions, or
quietly hosting the session.
Thanks to the University of Birmingham as well, by the way.
I just want to say one final thing, Mr. Abasi, Sagira again. Sorry, I have to interpret again because I just want to say, like I think Dr. Simon Latif have left now. She's not on, but she's been doing great job in creating awareness for COVID-19, not just for the patient and the public, but amongst healthcare professionals as well. That how we educate our patients and families as well. And like she said, and I think Professor Zafar has commented, you have commented all along that communication is the key, and culturally competent communication is the key.
Absolutely.
That we understand patient values, we understand where they're coming from, we understand their religious values as well, that their reaction are there because of certain values, certain religious belief. So we need to develop our communication strategies in a way that the patient understand our message.
I completely agree with you. You know, the most important lesson, I mean, I've learned from some of our military friends and also health professionals is, you know, you can never have happy conditions. There's always constant change. There's always constant evolution in how we communicate our thoughts. And now with COVID, it's mutating, it's evolving into something. But the key thing is how do we outmaneuver this enemy, this opposition, COVID-19?
It took us 6 weeks to develop the document, the patient information sheet, which we developed for patient to recruit in that study, because I have learned over the year working with British Pakistani population, especially with the autosomal recessive genetic disorder, that you can't tell them only that it happened because your cousin. You need to tell them that it happened because you both are a carrier. That is the way to convey the message. Same as that the language on, I don't know if you've seen that on Genomic Education website and Genomic Education, Genomic England patient information leaflet, that the way we communicate.
I agree with you. I agree with you, Dr. Sahir. You see, the thing is, the key is communication, and as you said, culturally competent communication, because all of us are from different backgrounds. Even people, I guess, even people in the military, you know, lined up, even they might look all like something of the Borg of Star Trek. No offense, General Error, but the thing is, each and every individual is all different, and each person has a different way of you know, understanding or being able to communicate themselves. But or even our community leadership, I guess, up and down the ranks, it's all about adaptability. It's not just up and down the ranks, it's across the ranks, and a clear understanding of the mission which is to defeat COVID-19. Yeah. So, Dr. Sahira, I would love to actually speak with you maybe after this session.
Absolutely, very
to
welcome.
see how we can actually reach.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very
much. No, absolutely. I'm not going to leave you alone now. You know that.
Thank you.
Okay, but Paul, do you want to say a few words? No,
yeah,
my pleasure.
my pleasure. Firstly,
Paul, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you for arranging this, Mohammed, and also I know Rubab and Dr. Zafar, who's left now. He's had to go to another meeting. And also for General Nansen and General Asif Sakira, Brigadier Dr. Mohammed, and everybody else took part, Reverend Rana. Really, it's an amazing Zoom that we've got together here, and that we've been able to bring so many different people from so many different fields and different countries together in a meeting to discuss what is the biggest challenge, probably for our generation. This is turning out to be a tremendous thing that is much bigger than what we anticipated last year when it started. As Paul said, you know, it's when you go into it, you don't know necessarily. You have your plan, but things don't always turn out as you planned, and then the plans have to be adapted. And you made some excellent points, and really appreciate that. I particularly took to heart your comments about education and how it's important to start young people off on the right foot when they're young. Because of course, all our professional people in society, whether they become soldiers or officers within the armed forces, whether they become NHS people, whether they become politicians, whoever they become in society, they all start off in our school system. So it's important to get our children off on the right foot at school. And it's something that has concerned me for some years, because I have noticed during even my lifetime, the culture change within our society. And as Dr. Zafar said, it is impressive the number of people who've put themselves out during this COVID crisis as volunteers to help the NHS and with food kitchens and food parcels and things like this. But at the same time, it shouldn't be something which we are shocked that, wow, people are actually helping out. It should be something that as citizens within our society, whichever country we live in, we feel it is our duty to do something, especially in times of crisis, to help our society. We all are members of a society. We all are citizens. And if the society goes wrong, if disaster happens and things fall apart, it affects us. It affects every single one of us. And we have to instill that consciousness in our young people from an early age. And, you know, one of the things, we have a couple of members of this Zoom conference who have actually come from Indonesia. One of the things I was particularly impressed with Indonesia when I went over there is after students leave school, they actually have to do a couple of years within the Scouts. It's mandatory. They have to do a couple of years in the Scouts. And I think this, it's one of the things that probably adds to the character of the Indonesian people. They are very helpful. They're people that tend to have a community focus. And when things happen, they look at what they can do to contribute to community efforts. And we don't always see that elsewhere in the world. And we don't always see it even in the UK. So it's something that maybe there's something that we need to do in this country in future. And, you know, this crisis of COVID, it's waking us up to, yes, the great things about our societies, but it's also waking us up to where there's room for improvement. And we can take lessons from that. And I think we must take lessons from that. And we must implement those lessons afterwards so that all our societies can be for the better in future and better prepared for the next crisis that inevitably will come along. Because this world will always have crises of one kind or another.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Thanks. Thank you to Generals Sahara and General Nansen, Dr. Latif, Dr. Iqbal. I can see quite a few friends here. Hope we can continue this conversation and keep developing these conversations. And I think the thing is also for you, all of yourselves, to start developing these conversations within your own local environments with people that you know, that COVID-19 can be defeated. It can be defeated with good leadership, and each and every one of us, I think, needs to show that leadership, which General Sahara, General Nansen, and Dr. Saima Latif, and Professor Zafar Iqbal alluded to as well. Thank you very much, everyone. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave this on for the next 5 to 10 minutes. So if there's anyone who wants to, I'll be here. If they want to communicate with myself or any other colleagues here, we're here. And thank you again.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you and have a good evening. Bye.